gaan naar Mexico. Daar hebben we contact met de schrijfster Fernanda Melchor. Zij gaat hier geïnterviewd worden door Persis Bekkering. We zijn heel blij dat zij bereid was om zich te laten interviewen. Ik ga het woord, het podium, het gesprek overlaten aan Persis Bekkering.
Thank you, Oscar. I'm going to continue in English. First of all, I'd like to say that if you have a question for Fernanda Melchor, you can use the chat box function. Towards the end of the conversation, there will be a bit of time for your questions. And I also just like to know that you're listening and watching and thinking along with us. So yeah, drop a line. Dat mag ook in het Nederlands. Fernanda Melchor's Orkaanseizoen was first published in 2017 in Spanish. And the Dutch translation, Orkaanseizoen, that I have here was published earlier this year. It was nominated for the International Booker Prize, which we all know was won by Dutch author Marieke Lucas-Reineveld. The novel opens with a corpse, with the dead, smiling face of the witch of fictional town La Matosa. And what follows is a furious, whirling, shocking, terrifying narrative from which we can scramble the details that led up to the witch's murder. And alongside, we get to know La Matosa's inhabitants, poverty-stricken, violent, and passionate. Melchor depicts a community shattered by drug trafficking, natural disasters, and the oil industry. Now, where in any regular crime novel, this prologue would set off an investigation, we are quickly aware that no one is going to be interested in the truth in Orkaanseizoen because we are in Mexico, the cops are criminals, and the victim is a woman, and no one cares about women's bodies. So, Fernanda, you can probably hear from my voice that the novel didn't leave me unaffected. I think it's a masterpiece, so I'm very happy to talk to you. I think it read to me as if you stared into the darkness for so long that you started to distinguish different hues of dark. So as a fellow writer, the first thing I need to know is how have you been able to do this? How have you experienced writing this very violent, dark story?
Well, it was super difficult to write this book. But before beginning to talk, Persis, I really want to say that I'm really glad to be here in Cross Border Festival. I can only wish that I could be there as it was originally intended, to be in that beautiful studio and listening to all these amazing artists and poets and performers. And well, things are like this, and I'm stuck in Mexico, and well, I'm here in this virtual strange presence, but really happy to be anyway a part of the festival. And Persis, yes, well, you know, I've been trying to figure out why I wrote this book, and I think it's very different when I wrote this book originally in Spanish, and I really never thought that it will be translated or that anybody outside Mexico will be interested in reading a story like this with such a crude language and great use of colloquial speech. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I've been thinking about it a lot now, not while I was writing it. While I was writing it, I kind of sensed that it was something that I needed to do. It was like this sort of, I don't know, I felt like possessed by the novel, like to have the need of writing it. And I think now with some distance that it really troubled me, a lot of things that happened in Mexico at that time that are still happening. But when I wrote Orkaanseizoen in 2015, the first draw, I was, I don't know, in the midst of a personal crisis, but also, you know, there were violence all over me in Mexico. I live in a city that's called Puebla, that's 2 hours away from Mexico City in the Central Valley region. But I grew up in Veracruz, in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And 2015 was the year when they began to find mass graves, you know, filled with corpses, dismembered corpses of people who went missing in the years before, where the where the war between narco traffickants and the government was at its highest. And also it was a situation about the murder of women that was every day in the press. Every day there were like news of women getting killed by I don't know, their husbands or their family, or by total strangers or by neighbors. And I just I was raising my stepdaughter Hannah at that time, and I just think it was a whole confluence of things that made me write that novel. And besides, I've always been interested in violence. I've always thought that in the most violent stories, there's always like the presence of this humanity. We tend to think that what makes us human, it's all the good stuff that we do, like or heroism or capacity to give, or the capacity to love, to be tender, for example, with our children. But also what makes us human is the other side of that angel face. It's like the devil face, like the envy, the revenge, hate, prejudice. All those things are also in human nature. So I've always been interested in that part of the human nature, because it's the one that we are ashamed to talk about, or we normally try to hide, and we idealize the other part. So I just think that the reality in Mexico just I couldn't stop thinking about this dark side, because its consequences were everywhere. So I guess I was just trying to understand. And I'm a writer. The thing I do is to write stories. So I try to understand, to get to know what's happening through fiction. That was what I was trying to do.
But it must have been very tough, I can imagine, to stay with that for so long. One of the things that also struck me is that I think it's one of the most violent books that I've read, and it could have become unbearable. I mean, it was difficult to read, but it could have become unbearable to read, but it never was. I think there was always a right balance with moments of tenderness or even beauty. How have you been able to find a way to write it in such a way that we can still follow you?
That is a very interesting question, because normally I feel sometimes the temptation of asking for forgiveness every time I have to talk about this book, because it is true that it is crude. But the thing with art and literature in general is that you can approach a certain, it cannot be unreadable if you want the book to be read. So you're always playing with the limits of what can be said, what should be said, what can be thought, and what should be taught. So I was always trying to play and trying to get to the maximum, but not overstepping into that, because I didn't want the reader to throw away the book, And I know that's happened to some readers, but most people are able to read the book, finish the book, get into the skin of these characters, get shocked, and realize that it's just fiction, that it just makes us closer to some truth, but it is not reality. So here in Mexico, I always get comments. Everyone says like, oh my God, this novel is like the reality, but it is not reality. It's totally fiction. And it takes, I don't know, I guess a mix of courage and stubbornness to write a story like this. I always thought that to be able to write about misery, not only material misery, but spiritual misery, one should be able to live inside the skin of these characters for a long time, because otherwise it will be like, positioning myself over these characters and judge them from above. And I didn't want to do that. These characters have already experienced a lot of injustice and inequality in their lives. So for a woman to, just for a middle class, college educated woman like me to position myself above them and just judge what they're doing. So I had to create this narrator that is capable to be inside the character at the same time. And that meant to create this sort of characters, conflicts, and scenarios. That meant that I had to live inside their skins for a long time. And that was what was more difficult about this novel, that I had to live inside the mind of people that are misogynist or homophobic, or just live, like every day in such a state of rage and desperation. And or to be inside the mind of a character like Norma, who's a 13-year-old girl who's pregnant and desperate and just don't know what to do. And so she's always thinking about just killing herself and ending with this, this terrible life that she's been having since she was born. And at the same time, I had to live and go through everything that she went through, this quest for her mother's love, this search for tenderness in her stepfather, and then having instead her sexual, abuse for let's call it that way. And it was the most difficult to do, to be inside the minds of these characters and to write about them and try to be at the same time to present their truths as better as I could, but at the same time to try to make literature out of all these difficult and awkward emotions.
Yeah, because I felt also as a reader, I was challenged because everyone is implicated in the crime in a way in the village, but the people are also powerless and poor. But as a reader, I also felt implicated. I could never morally indulge. Like I didn't even like the victims, or I didn't, you didn't try to make the witch a likable person. She is also very problematic, I think, and that's very courageous. I think you took risks there as, to never make anyone really show as someone who deserves our pity.
I think otherwise it will make them like cartoon characters, like stereotypes, and it is so difficult to talk about this kind of sort of material conditions. So I didn't really want them to be schemes of characters, but I wanted to have this to be like 3D characters, like have this humanity, like you and me, that we can be like lovely people, but also we have our dark sides, our secret desires, like everyone else. So I work really hard to provide my characters with these complex personalities, and I think it is I think it is the characters are the most memorable thing about this novel, because finally the murder of the witch it's anecdotal. I mean, it makes you feel that things like this happen in Mexico or all around the world, each hour, every day of the week, and nothing happens. But it is like a wound that's never healed, and I wanted to show what this precise wound meant for a community.
Yeah.
Not only why some guys or people will kill another person, the motives behind this horrendous crime, but also how a community makes it possible to create an environment where people will do that, and also to refuse to let any justice be in a place like this.
Yeah, yet in a way, by giving them a voice, there is something to it that feels like, well, I don't know. It's not justice, but at least you're giving them a voice. Like the prose is really raging, right? Sentences stretch out over pages, and paragraphs are longer than single pages, and it's like I had the idea sometimes that I was reading a choir of people that had never been asked anything, and finally they had the chance to speak out, and so they were breathless, like yelling everything that was in them. And yeah, I don't know if you.
The thing, no, well, I have to create this sort of narrator for several motives, but I would like to say that these long paragraphs that, you know, each chapter is a long, really long paragraph. And I didn't do it like that because I thought I was really intelligent and I could do this technical defy just to, I don't know, it was really organic. It was like the story needed the prose to be like this, because it needs to create this sort of centrifugal force to get the hold of the reader, but also to take the reader into this, you know, vortex of really dark stuff happening and really violent things happening all the time, with this also these moments of tenderness, these moments of beauty. They're just like tiny little specks that are scattered all across the novel, because without them, you know, it will be only misery and dark stuff. And I didn't want the novel to be like that. I wanted the novel to have the texture of real life, you know, even when you can be sad or angry, and sometimes you will look at the garden, the way the sun, you know, reflects on the leaves of the trees, and think this is just beautiful, and your life is still misery, but you have these pretty moments of peace or tenderness or beauty, and I wanted the novel to have it. But it is true that the balance just goes to the darker side, and it was never my intention to give voice to actual people in Mexico that had to live in town like this, that had to face unemployment, uneducation, and lack of opportunities, lack of social security, for example. It was not my intention. I think La Matosa, it's also like a metaphor of a lost youth, of my childhood, for example, in a family that had to suffer a lot of violence, psychological and physical. And I think people who grow up in families, broken families or dysfunctional families, will see that La Matosa is also a metaphor for this kind of upbringing. And I kind of know how the characters feel, because I lived in my own Matosa for a while, and I did whatever I could to escape, you know, a life like this. So it is true that it talks about really specific social conditions, but I think many people, and I think that's why it's been translated and it's been awarded several awards in other countries, and it's been I'm super grateful that it's found lots of readers in other countries. It is because I think people can identify with this sort of violence and this sort of like mental prisons that we get ourselves into.
Yeah, that brings me to a question of someone who's watching us, Andrea. Fernanda, you mentioned that in Mexico people feel like this is reality, what you've described. And I wonder if the reception of the book is different in countries that have experienced lots of violence. Like, have you had responses from people in other countries saying that they related to it or not?
Yeah, I think it depends from country to country. I think the novel has been doing less. It is seen as fiction in countries that are very different to Mexico. I'm thinking, for example, in France, where the novel is considered a little too trashy. Trashy in the sense that it's just, you know, like heavy metal. It is so just heavy and dense, because it is difficult to think the life in France and the life in Mexico. They are very different, and I think But for example, in Germany, this book won 2 awards, the Anna Seegers Prize and the International House of Culture of Berlin Prize. And I was just there, and you know, Germany, what can I say? I mean, now we think, in Mexico, we think of Germany as, you know, like really progressive people, like, you know, everything, you can live a life whatever you want in Germany, and it will be okay. There's respect, and their rights are guaranteed for everyone. And economic, you can live a good life in Germany, but at the same time, of course, the German people has lived through horrible violence, you know, the past century. You know, just after World War II, you can clearly understand things that happen in the novel, and you can clearly put it in some places in Europe, of course. Or I was just having this amazing event with the Festival Book Forum in Ukrainian, and Alexander, my interviewer, he will totally understand what they think about police being corrupt, you know, and authoritarianism. They will totally understand in Ukraine what I was talking about. And I think it depends. I don't know, it is just sometimes so hard for me to put myself into the minds of other readers, because I don't really know their cultures, but by the way they write to me and tell me what they think of their books. For example, Indian readers have had an amazing response, for example, and I never thought Indian readers will ever read my book, and they will really identify and understand things about misogyny and violence against women, for example. Mm-hmm. But it is just so easy, I think, to make exotic, like violence against women, when we know still there is a reality that goes in every country. In Spain, for example, femicide is still a reality, and there's lots of countries where women, we are not allowed the same rights of than men, and it's a struggle everywhere. And I think for some people it is just easier to read this book and to think violence it's only in Mexico, because that way we can exotize this violence, and maybe refuse to see it a little bit in your country. But I think the violence is always there, and I read horrible things too about what's happening in Europe, but I know it is not in the degree that is happening in Mexico.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was also why you chose a fictional town, La Matosa. Even Veracruz is not mentioned, I think, in the book. Has a different name. It gives it a layer of mythology, of a fable. So I understand it now as something else, so that you want to make it more, maybe not universal, but at least as a canvas for all our societies.
I just thought it will be more fun to create a whole new town.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, you know, I really I like doing research. I've done also narrative journalism, so I'm used to writing chronicas and journalistic pieces about reality. So I can do my research, and I love doing research. But at the same time, I like to invent things. I like to imagine things, and creating a whole new town just for me. It was also to take the example of Gabriel Garcia Marquez with Macondo, that he created his own hometown. He recreated his hometown into this new mythical, legendary, small little town, and it gives you liberty, I think, and that's why I chose to. And I never mentioned the port of Veracruz. I think some places mention the port, just like that, without the name Veracruz, because it allows me to do that, to imagine things and to shift things according to my wishes, and that is why fiction is so fun to create.
Well, I'm happy that we're ending here. That with this sentence, that it's fun to create, because we started off with the cruelties. Unfortunately, our time is already up. It was so fast. Thank you so much, Fernanda, for sharing your thoughts on your beautiful novel, Orkaanseizoen. And yeah, I'm super happy I got to talk to you, and take care there in Mexico.
I thank you, Persis. This has been a blast. And thank you all for listening. And have a great evening.
Bye.